Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review, and today's album review is black metal, I believe. Not always my cup of tea, but we'll see where it takes us today. We're going to be looking at Ellende's Todbringer, which, I mean, I translated this stuff. Ellende is German for misery, and Todbringer is Deathbringer. I'm not thinking this is going to be something I enjoy, but let's dig into it. We have 7 tracks ahead of us. There is an 8th track that appears to be on most issuings of this album, but it is an instrumental of a track from a previous album, and on Bandcamp they list it as a bonus track, so I am not going to explore that one, primarily because I don't have the context for it. I don't know the original. Assuming this is an instrumental straight up, that all they did was remove the vocals from it. I've always kind of been of the mind that if you include vocal work, it is a component of the song, and to not have it is an incomplete playing of the music. It's a very strange decision for me. So that would not be my preferred way to be introduced to that track. And thirdly, I don't know if it's going to continue on with the thematic elements of this album. So I don't know if it's actually going to even resonate with the rest of the conceptual components of what they're doing with the first 7. So I'm just going to exclude it. We're not going to touch it. We're going to do the 7 tracks that are not bonus components of this Todbringer. All right, so let's dive into this. We have a 1-minute opening into an almost 8-minute first proper track. At that point, we'll take a break and discuss what's going on in it. So let's dive into this. I'm not going to be able to pronounce these titles, but I do have them over there, so that's going to be helpful. Let's dive in and start this album. I'm trying not to get my hopes up. Not where I thought they were going with that one. Kind of feels hymnic. But also like a coming home. Okay. Okay, let's get into this first proper track. I'm really interesting timing stuff going on right here. If we take that plucked string instrument in the back as our metronome, because it is doing eighth notes pretty symmetrically, various instruments are coming in early or late. the strings in the background creating that really warm atmosphere around the cold guitars is neat. There's almost a positivity in the duality of the guitars. I think it's just really leaning into that hymn sounds, but the drums are a lot less pronounced than other black metal. And it's almost chill. It's so far away from the thrashy sound that I tend to associate with black metal. There we go. Really interesting texture put on those vocals. Changed that a long time ago. That's the black metal I was expecting. Again, there's just such a warmth to this that is not something I associate with black metal at all. arpeggios too, aren't they? Okay. So here's the thing. Here's what's interesting is that there is certainly a black metal element here. There's a ton of compression on our guitars. There is uh oh well the vocals. They're very black metal to me. There's also the drumming, which half the time is very black metal. The other half, well, we'll get to that, won't we? And then there is the notes that are chosen. And here's the thing, right? Is the notes are the notes that they're using, the relationship to dyads, the chords, all of the harmonic resonance in here, is that black metal? I'm sure fans of the genre will be like, sure, of course, here's five other projects that use similar sounds, or 10 other projects use similar sounds. But to me, black metal is a very cold, calculating, apathetic genre, um, that either utilizes bleak or melancholic dyads and harmonic ideas, or Baroque ideas. Baroque music is such a huge influence on a lot of black metal. I'm not really sure why the community gravitated that way, but they did. We hear a lot of uh, Baroque composition show up in black metal. This almost feels like a hymn. It's very positive, it's very warm. I mentioned multiple times it feels like returning home. I love the way that they took the piano idea from our intro and worked it into this track. Not just the lines themselves, which were adapted in a variation into this in the guitars and the strings, but also just the overall vibe of it. I'm pretty sure we're in the same key, the same chord progression as our intro. It's very much one whole track. Um, which is like it's something I've always wanted to bring up, and I've kind of had this conversation with myself a few times. I don't want to sit on this too long because we already have a lengthy video ahead of us, but the idea of taking an intro to a track that obviously is supposed to be listened to together, such as this. It's not just that our intro runs into our second track, but they share so much commonality in the composition that I really can't imagine listening to track two without the intro to it. The intro it's not really an introduction to the album, it's just the intro to this opening track. And it's really weird that bands, especially metal bands, I feel do this often, is if it's not a metal, if they're a purely metal band, right? In this case, I'm going to wager most of these tracks are going to be like what we just listened to. Very few are going to be piano solos. So the piano solo is an isolated event, so they put it in their own track. But this should be a 6-track album. there is never a situation where I would want to listen to the second track without that intro. It's not even a different track. They are the same song in so many ways. And I see this a lot in metal, and I'm curious if there's been any reason why it happens so often, why something that is so obviously a part of another track gets separated out because it's different group of instruments. I don't know. I'm not thinking it's going to be an answer to that. I'm kind of figuring it's a bit rhetorical, or that if people are curious, that there's just no information about it. But it is something I've wondered. Anyways, though, yeah, we carry over a lot of this stuff. Though it's very warm. It's just it feels like venturing out for a day, or depending if we can extrapolate this to like a fantasy concept too, and like for a week or whatever. Maybe actually it doesn't have to be fantasy. If your job requires you to go all over the place, you could be away from home for a week doing work. And then that moment when you feel, you got this week's worth of tasks done, everything's going exactly as planned, everything worked so well, and you finally get to return home, and that moment of not only just being in a familiar place, being in a place that's yours, but also knowing that you got all those tasks done. Your to-do list is empty in a sense. There's probably more for next week, but you got this week's work done, and now you get to relax in your house. And that's what a lot of this feels like. There's a warmth, there's a comfort, there's a reassurance to the harmonic work that's going on in here. Might I say this is beautiful? Did I just call black metal beautiful? I think I did. Um, but this is specifically looking at the guitars and drums in the slower sections. We do have a more traditional blast beat thing with like fast tremolo picking going on at one point, and we keep some of that sonic resonance, but we lose the chill. So that's an interesting section. I haven't quite come to terms with that yet. It's like being comfortable but being stressed out, and I don't like that emotional combination there. And the vocals, of course, don't complement any of that for me. I'm sure there are some people who are going to find themselves very at peace with this vocal style. That ain't me. This vocal style is still to this day a bit rough on my ears. It's it's a lot more palatable than it was in the past, but still not something I seek out nor enjoy to a very strong capacity. And that's sort of the whole song, at least at this point. What I really like is, again, it's all the guitar work, really. The drums, the drums either shift from full on abrasive, blast beats, alternating snare and bass kind of concepts, or just really chill, laid back metronome. Really aiming for downbeats in a tempo that isn't, it's about a middle ground. I'd say our tempo is probably 90, 100 maybe. Actually, I guess it depends on where you feel it. If you feel just the accents, it's probably going to be a bit slower than that. Um, but yeah, the drums do what the situation call for, but aren't really expressive. We do get a really nice, I think, a ride cymbal idea with sort of a syncopated rhythm and a nice accent pattern near the end of the track that I really enjoyed. But other than that, a lot of it's very, uh, what's that word? It does what it needs to do. I'm thinking industrial. Um, Gets the job done but isn't fancy kind of thing. But industrial is not the word I'm thinking of. Functional, maybe. Um, but the guitars, they bring so much warmth. I keep saying that word. It really is what I keep coming back to. Um, the vocals then lend themselves to be a type of texture. I think one of the things I have a problem with, and I've never really been able to vocalize it until now, is that in this style of music, the vocals are a texture of compression, hyper compression. We do get a little bit of pitch later on when we get the screams, the wails, the compressed agony wails. And we do have a rising pitch idea that we hear there. That was different. It contrasted the rest of it. But with the rest of the vocal type, it really is just a lot of that crackling and popping without much of a tone to it, which is also what black metal guitar tones tend to be. And I think this just clicked with me while listening to this track. They're in the same sonic space. And it really flattens the dynamic landscape of a lot of black metal because their vocals and guitars are making the same sound, give or take. It's very similar. And when you have the bass pretty much removed, I don't know if there is a bass in here. I tried really hard to hear it. I thought I might have heard it a couple of times, but it was with the bass kick. So I'm not sure if I just heard some extra production on the kick or not. Um, but when your song is percussion, fuzzy guitar tones, and then fuzzy vocal crackling, it's just a very small dynamic range of sounds coming out of your track. And this simplification of texture is something that is utilized often for meditative music, which is why I think a lot of people find black metal to be calming or soothing or good to just get lost in. It is kind of like the ambient of metal. It focuses on a smaller number of textures doing a smaller number of things in an effort to help the person not focus too much on the music. And I never really clicked with me why, but yeah, I think that's the reasoning behind people's enjoyment of that particular aspect of black metal. And it's why more energetic black metal, like Umgwa with their wild drumming techniques, or man, what is that symphonic? Well, we can even say something like Archspire, which has black metal at its core but pushes more towards avant-garde areas. Why they're less meditative? Even though we have tremolo picking and blast beats and 16th notes coming out of our drums and all of this energy, it's not really dynamically dense, even though it is rhythmically dense. And the rhythmic speed can get, well, it becomes the norm, right? That's the whole thing about dynamic. Dynamics talk about a high and a low point. I did those backwards. A high and a low point in a track for anything. Dynamic textures, dynamic volume range, dynamic instrumentation range, dynamic sound sphere range, whether the song sounds close to you or far away. There's a ton of ways to introduce dynamics into a track, and black metal tends to stick with one volume, one speed. A lot of black metal has that thrashy element to it. One texture, hyper compression, and one instrumentation group. You usually have your two guitars, your vocals sometimes, and your drums. And your bass. There's some black metal that allows the bass to be heard. They don't lock their sound up in the bottom of the in the bottom of the EQ, bottom of the mix. And so that simplification of dynamic quality is something that could be a palatable, positive design choice for people when they're looking for metal to listen to. So yeah, that's not really about Ellend, Ellende at all, but it is something interesting I landed upon while listening to this, and I think, well, it's neat. I don't know if you guys find it neat. Maybe you're just like, I like my black metal, and that's all there is to it. Tell me what's great about this song. But it was a neat little find I landed on there. Now, I think the last thing we need to touch on, then we'll hit lyrics and move on, which makes me think this is going to be a short video. Um, Short for album reviews, anyways. I think we'll probably wrap this up around the 2:45 or 3 hour mark. Is just the overall speed of our main sections. Our bridge, of course, went to the tremolo picking and blast beats, but aside from that, oh, we gotta talk a little bit about the strings too, because that was nice. Um, you know, the drums sort of emphasize every beat. That's kind of about it. There's a couple of interbeat hits, but they're not really accented. And it's just a really chill, laid back drum pattern. We don't have the tremolo picking. We don't have 16th note picking on the guitars. It's just a really nice melodic flow. I think there's an eighth note arpeggiation on one of the guitars through some parts of this section. And the other guitar kind of lays down chordal ideas, although we do have a counterpoint section where both are doing their own melodies. But it's all really laid back and chill. Quarter notes and eighth notes are how we're operating here, and that is just not black metal. And it's interesting to hear this chill, warm, reassuring sound with this laid back rhythmic pattern and those super distorted fuzzy guitars. But it's neat. One of the things I talk about with black metal is that all of the noise gets in the way of me hearing it, and I really appreciate when we remove the distortion or remove the frequency of attacks, and I really get to hear the notes themselves. And I'm getting better at listening past all of the texture and stuff, but this really helped just allowing these notes to resonate. It still had the fuzz, but I got to feel the notes. We existed with them long enough. Because an attack has a percussive element to it, and when you attack often, tremolo picking, 16th note picking, stuff like that, the percussive element of how you play your instrument, of picking these strings, of that attack, gets into and covers up the note just as much as the compression does. Which is another thing I never really touched on because I never really thought about it. But yeah. So when we slow the song down, even though it has all this compression, all this fuzz on it, I can still hear the notes very clearly when they allow them to ring out. Just very cool. I'm not a real big fan of the vocals. The blast beat section just sounded like very traditional black metal to me. It's kind of mid. I don't hate it, but I don't really love it. Um, but man, that verse, if you take the sections where there's no vocals on them, I dig it. Yeah, I could listen to that. I don't know if I would necessarily put it on. I still would prefer a cleaner production like we had with our piano solo and like we had with the beginning of this track when we had the strings come in, which I thought we really were going to have a hi-fi black metal, or maybe I was just completely wrong and we weren't getting into black metal at all, because we had the clean piano production, we had the clean string production, but then that guitar came in on the right side, and it was just one hit and allowed the note to ring out, and it was just this wall of fuzz, and I was like, "Yep, yep, that's it. We're in for a ride now." But yeah, with all that clear, I would just much rather have the clear production. But it is one of the more palatable black metal styles I've heard. It's just slowed down. Give me slowed and reverbed black metal. Oh man, has anybody done that? The YouTube music meme thing where it's like your favorite song but slowed and reverbed? Like, have we done that with black metal? Is it even good? I don't know. Um, so here's another thing though, and like I said, we need to talk about this is the strings. I mentioned that that main slower riff is very warm, it's very reassuring, and the notes do represent that feeling. But when that guitar came in the beginning, that wall of fuzz, that was a very cold guitar tone, very electronic, or very electrical. Let me say it that way. Like listening to the electricity in a wire, right? Just that bzzz, that humming, right? Or if you've got like something I'm very familiar with right now is if you have some sort of ground loop in an audio system and you get that electrical hum. Like it's a very cold sound. It's very robotic. It reminds me of electrical components, which makes sense, right? We have an electric guitar, we have electricity coming through it, but it's just a very cold, narrow sound. But I talked so much about this song's warmth. It comes from the strings that sit around everything. It is a fantastic addition to this track, to this sound, to incorporate the warmth of the acoustic instruments, the low end resonance that they bring in that the electric guitars are not EQ'd for. Whether it's a production thing or pedals or whatever, the tones that they have crafted are a bit more narrow and with a bit more higher end resonance, which makes sense when you think about how much they're distorting and overdriving here and compressing this stuff. It makes sense that black metal is a bit on the colder, higher end side of pitches, but having this lower end resonance from these, it just brings this warmth, and I think melts that cold, icy sound of black metal guitars, and it just works really well. I'm curious if they're going to continue with this. Is this album about this feeling of reassurance, of safety, of warmth? It feels antithetical to black metal, or at least what I've been introduced to of black metal, which I've always talked about as feeling ecstatic, snowy, right? These are the kinds of adjectives, cold, that I've always used to talk about black metal, and this is a tonal opposite in a lot of ways. But then we get to the lyrics. And these, well, let's just say that the lyrics are a bit more angry than the music is. It's very descriptive. I don't know how much of that is the translation. This is a song that is written in German. I think it's German. We're gonna go with German. If I'm wrong, you can correct me in the comments. Um, it's sung in German, and I had to translate them with my usual tools, and it's very flowery, and I don't know, like I said, if that's a translation or if that is the original intent. But it seems to be, at least this one, very angry about religion. It says, it's a chorus. It's repeated a couple of times. I don't know if it is a chorus or not, but it is a repeated stanza. And I feel like this is probably the most indicative, uh, I guess we could say, theme of the song. It says, promises a country where honey flows, where purity lives. In truth, it's just a symbol full of shame and blood. And I was trying to figure out what they meant by this. Obviously, right? So somebody's promising a fantastic place to go. Pure honey flows everywhere, and that started to make me think about biblical stuff, right? We don't really talk so much about honey flowing as being this good thing, but I remember being in church that places having honey was always like this big thing. Like it happens so much in the Bible. If you were in a rich area, or I think even heaven was referred to a couple of times as where heaven flowed like rivers and stuff like that. Not heaven, honey, of course. Um, but yeah, it's just this area that's just perfect, right? And it says, but that's not what it really is. And we get to some different lines that I think lean into this anti religious element. We have one stanza that says, "What does a life mean? There's no pride in holiness, the addiction to misery of a death cult." And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of stuff there, but we do have an allusion to holiness and being prideful in one's holiness, which I can see attributed to religion. And then the addiction of misery, the addiction to misery of a death cult. And I think what they're saying is specifically looking at possibly Judeo Christianity, is that a lot of the religion is about the afterlife. This is a temporary test for a better afterlife. So much of the religion is about what happens after you die. And so they take this and they twist it and refer to it as a death cult. And so the addiction to misery would be all of the presumably pleasures denied by following the teachings of an ancient book, right? I think that's what they're referring to here. And we go into a couple of things that I think support that. We have one isolated line. It says, "Did you ever get what once you worshipped?" Which I think could be taken two ways, possibly based on the translation. Did you ever understand what you were actually practicing? Or another one would be, did you ever get that reward you were seeking for practicing this? Um, but I think it spells out very plainly in our bridge during what I believe is going to be the faster, true black metal section of the track. It says, "Seduce yourself and become God's whore. You have the wrong guide. You might as well also worship misery." Which I think is an interesting way to go about wording that. And there's a couple of other lines in here. I think some of it goes a bit over my head. Again, could be the very metaphorical language, it could be the translation, but I think I have enough of a read here with enough supporting ideas to say that this is an anti-religious track. Specifically, a Western religious monotheistic uh, view. So, how does this relate to the song? I don't hear this at all. This is very angsty. This is very angry. It certainly shines through the vocal work. We have somebody yelling and screaming with tons of compression. That sort of anger comes through there, but the music doesn't. And maybe it's purposeful. I've talked a couple of times of calling the song musically, the guitar work and the string work, as feeling like a hymn. And maybe that was supposed to be purposefully done as a sort of satirical use of religious music. And the chord progressions and harmonic work of hymns to have the opposite effect, to talk negatively about the religion, where hymns are typically used to praise the God and speak positively of them. But I'm not sure if that's actually what's going on here. Because we do have the pure black metal bridge, which I think leans into the vibe and emotion of these lyrics a little bit better. So if their purpose was to create an anti-hymn, I think it would make more sense to run with that warmth, reassuring feeling for the entirety of the song. Though I think it's also, if I understand this translation, which I haven't done it, so I'm kind of translating by what I know, possibly the title is Ballad of the Dead. So having it a ballad, slower, more emotionally charged, also makes sense from that point of view as well. And I think that's the only song that I might be able to, yeah, that's the only song that I have, I think, even a close read without a translator on the title. All right, so let's bring this back. We're heading into the next track here. All these tracks are fairly lengthy. There are 7 tracks, and the first one is only a minute, so there's only 6 proper tracks in here. And we're running at 50 minutes for the album. So everything in here is pretty lengthy. We're probably going to stop after each and every track to discuss them. Unlike other albums where we kind of group up 2 or 3 if shorter tracks or just a longer album. So let's move forward into track 3 and see where this takes us. Right now, it's black metal, but it's not, and there's a lot of tonal dissonance between the lyrics and the music. So let's see if any of that gets changed or added on or whatever in the rest of the album. Yeah, so another slow 4. This one has a triplet feel though. Love the way the 2 guitars are playing off of each other, and the strings, once again, bringing a really nice warmth to everything going on. Really beautiful, strong emotional resonance. Just heard the bass. Finally. So the guitar is actually taking lead melody right here. Vocals are in the spotlight though. It's almost, it's rhythmic counterpoint. Yeah, and see, without the strings underneath in this part, it does kind of hit more of that traditionally cold black metal. Interestingly, we have threes within threes here, which is very cool. Seeing this emotional growth, even I'd say some dynamic quality to this. Dynamic expansion anyways. The tremolo picking underneath the slower guitar melody. Love the way the drummer's dancing around with the cymbals right now. There's a lot of ride work, but it's not exclusive. Cymbals are on off beats, which kind of gives it a momentum. What in the world is the drummer doing? Okay, so two things. I don't really have much to add on later on, so I'm just gonna touch on them now. First of all, there about 3 minutes ago, um, the audio visualizer was just solid. It was wall of sound. There were no dynamics, no spikes. nothing to have little volume differences between hits. It was just a solid volume level. Uh, how big of a sound it needs to be for that. The other thing is the drummer at the end there started to play around with polymeter, and then that kind of didn't work. It sounded like the drums fell apart for about half of a bar, and then they came back and they still had the really nice cymbal work that they had been presenting throughout. So it's just kind of that felt like black metal cymbal work to me at that moment, and then paired it with more of a punk snare and bass pattern. It kind of came out of nowhere, and then they just ran with it for the last 30 seconds of the track. Um, I'm kind of curious what happened there. It's just a very strange final 20-ish 30 seconds of drumming. Wild. So this follows in the footsteps of pretty much everything that I talked about. Sorry, apparently Bryan needed more sleep yesterday. Past Bryan did not make good decisions for present Bryan to do a proper analysis. Um, a lot of the things I've already talked about with the second track. Um, cold guitars warmed up by strings, although we also had a really nice choir section in here. I want to touch on that later. Um, vocals that bring out a similar texture to what the guitars are doing. Drumming, little less functional this time, which is very cool. Not to say that they don't work as their intended function, which is typically to keep the tempo, but the drummer also introduced some more melodic elements and some injecting some of their own personal flavor into ornamental ideas and fills as well. So just really nice to see the drummer expand a little bit. And that might have happened in the last track too, now that I'm thinking about it. But I was just so fixated on the harmonic qualities that I was being presented with in track two that uh, I don't think I paid the drums enough attention. So I'm gonna blame myself on that one, give them the benefit of the doubt, and figure that they were also doing that last track as well. I just missed it. Um, and once again, we have a song that bounces between more traditional black metal speed and a much slower ballady kind of concept that focuses more on the duality that the guitars bring, both in their dyads and in their counterpoint. Although we did see a really nice idea later on where both guitars did tremolo picking to provide a foundational texture, and there was still a guitar above all that centered doing a lead melody. That was, like I said, about 3 minutes prior to the end. That was at the wall of sound moment. Um, and that was just such a treat. Not specifically the wall of sound, but the layers that they were putting into there. This does seem to be, to me, a bit of an exceptional kind of black metal, but I wonder how much of that is a combination of the circumstances surrounding it. It is relatively new. We're talking 6 to 7 years old. 2016. I feel like a lot of the black metal we've listened to is a bit on the older side. Um, black metal's an old genre too. It's a wide range of uh, experiences within it, and of course, people have taken black metal as a base and ran in so many different directions with it. But this isn't that old of one, so there's a lot of modern production elements going on in here that still retain the black metal feel without going into that semi lo fi area. But it also, as far as I could tell, at least at this point in time, was a one person endeavor. And having that pure focus um, of intent certainly helps shine through some of the elements that I think might have gotten buried in any other uh, Well, in some other black metal groups where there are more cooks in the kitchen. And what I mean by that is our composer here, who, as far as I could tell, also does all the instruments, really talented dude there, um, doesn't really want to make black metal. And I know that's like a wild accusation to throw around. I say it with a bit of hyperbole, of course, but black metal is the afterthought here. The music is blackened. The vocals are very black metal. The guitars do have the fuzz and texture on them. Um, but what's on paper is not black metal, and what's on paper overrides the feeling of black metal in so many situations. And I find that fascinating. I also find it very surprising when this music and the emotions that they're going for are paired with the lyrics that they do. There's a really interesting dissonance there that at least I was paying attention a little bit to the lyrics while we were listening to it, and we're two for two for having that dissonance. It seems intentional at this point. I don't know if it's a circumstance of ability. All right, maybe these are the themes that he wants to talk about, but he's just not that great of a black metal writer, like pure black metal, like something where these really aggressive lyrics would pair better with. Maybe his composition style is just more suited to this sort of classical warm exploration of emotions, and he blackened that to sort of help transition it and pull it closer to the themes of his lyrics. But I do find it really interesting that it feels like the blackening was an afterthought. It's something that comes after the composition to help pull it in a specific direction that the music doesn't necessarily lean to on its own. And I wonder if we're going to see that for, I mean, we only have four more tracks. We don't have a lot of music left. Especially since this is going by rather quickly. I mean, we're already an hour in, but it doesn't feel like an hour in. Granted, we've only listened to 18 minutes of music so far. We have a lot of music ahead of us, but also feels like nothing. I don't know. It's just going by so fast for me, which is a good sign. Black metal tends to stretch time for me. It's a magical type of music that makes a 3-minute song feel like a 10-minute song, and I say that as endearing as I can. But this album's kind of flying. The tracks don't feel like they're all that lengthy. You know, when I saw the track list and I was like, oh, we don't have any 3-minute songs in here, 4-minute songs in here. Everything is like 7 plus. I'm like, man, this is gonna feel like a long album. And so far it hasn't. We'll see how that goes. Our next track's 15 minutes, so that might completely shift my opinion on this, but it'd be really interesting to see where this goes as far as my journey with it. Um, The choir. The choir is such a beautiful addition and direction to take after utilizing the strings in the last one. And we still do get strings in this track as well. But I think the choir kind of takes the cake for me in that they transform a section and create a sense of, what's the opposite of loneliness? Like surroundedness? Nope, that doesn't work. Whatever the opposite of loneliness is, feeling. Well, I guess I don't want the exact opposite because like loneliness is feeling by yourself, and I guess the opposite would be like feeling in a the direct opposite would be like feeling of being one of a million, right? Feeling so infinitesimally small, but definitely feeling that camaraderie of humanity. It makes it feel less isolated, I think is the word I'm going for there, which is just a really cool thing to do with black metal because once again it contradicts some of the emotional themes that I tend to associate with the genre. In a complete, well, what would normally be a twist, but seems to be the status quo here, is that it also seems to upend the lyrical themes. Um, in that it is once again about comfort and reassurance and feeling warmth, and the lyrics don't seem to be going in that direction again. So, um, yeah, it's just I don't know how to feel about this contradiction. I kind of just have to take it at face value and assume that there's some intent to it. Although, like I said, there might not be. It might just be the music that this person can write and the lyrics they want to write, and they just mash the two together. And it's very possible. I did see that there was a drummer that got picked up for at least one of the later albums. So it's very possible that some of the composition takes a different turn now that there's two people writing the music. But like I said, right now, here we are. We have one person, and this is their vision, and it's so intriguing for it to be this this combination of sounds and emotions and feelings. I don't really have too many notes. I took a few like topical things, the tonal dissonance between the lyrics and music, just the raw beauty of the chordal and harmonic elements, and the warmth of the strings, which is what I put down before I heard the choir, which I kind of just need to change that to extra ensemble is warm. Um, because aside from these ideas, it is pretty much straight black metal. It's just that these ideas kind of dominate everything else, and I think it's just a really cool division. Um, I'm trying to think, like, what do I normally talk about that I haven't yet? Like, one of them, structure. I don't really feel structure to these tracks. Like, the first time I said when we looked at the lyrics, there's a repeated stanza. Maybe that's a chorus, but I certainly didn't feel that. If anything, our first track felt like ABA, where we had our calm section and it had some subsections to it, and then the black metal speed section, and back to our A. And we did repeat the exact elements from that A. Here, though, there was one section that sort of felt repeated, where they took some previous ideas. I think it was the choir section, but there is nothing in the lyrics that would tell me that there is a repetition in there. There's nothing in here that I would say is a chorus. So, again, that's interesting. It's the complete opposite. um, so structure is kind of neat, and I think a lot of this is linear adjacent, where there might be recurring ideas, but not in a set pattern. It seems to it's possible even that the lyrics might come first. They're written very poetically, with stanzas jumping around in length, both um, rhythmically, how many syllables are in each line, but also how many lines are in each stanza. It doesn't seem, it's a very free form type of poetry writing. What do they call that? I don't know. I thought I knew of a term for poetry without a defined rhythm or a defined like line grouping, and I was like, it's free blank poetry, and like I can't remember what the blank is called, so maybe I'm misremembering something entirely. Um, Free rhythm? No, that doesn't sound right. It's very possible that this was written first and the music was written separate, maybe not even with it in mind, because there's a lot of places, like at the beginning of this, where I talked about, we had the vocals and then we had a guitar melody, and I said, oh, it's counterpoint, but like we don't have a melody out of our vocals, so I called it rhythmic counterpoint. And it's true, the vocals don't really line up with what the rest of the band is doing rhythmically very often at all. It almost does. I mean, it would not have surprised me if I hadn't have known that this was a single person project that I had found out, prior to listening to this. I might have assumed that the lyricist and the band wrote it two completely different times, and then he just mashed things together, and the vocalist is like, well, I'll just fit this in as best as I can, right? Or, they put it with another song, and like, man, it doesn't really fit with those ideas. What about this song? And since so far all of their songs are very similar in emotional resonance, it really doesn't matter. Well, and the lyrics are all pretty much on the same wavelength as well within themselves. It doesn't matter which song and what lyrics get paired together because they're all going to have that same connection or dissonance of connection in this case. So the end result's going to be similar regardless. But I know it's a one person job now, and unless they can sort of divide their brain out that way, I don't see how that's the case here. But it is interesting how the lyrics aren't just thematically distant, but I just picked up that they're also rhythmically distant. They don't always line up really well with what's going on around them. Almost like both are created in a vacuum. It's fascinating. All right, let's get into these lyrics. Um, it, because of where we came from, I want to see this in a similar light because it touches on some common subjects. There isn't any direct allusions to the afterlife or religion or God or anything like that in here, but we do return to the concept of worshiping death, which goes back to the idea of the death cult, right? But this one takes on a bit more of a misanthropic edge. There is one repeated stanza. You hear it twice, it's rather short. It says, "Don't you remember the sweat, the blood, the stench in this world?" Is the destiny of time with things we might also like, such as shards of misery and the ballad of death. If you also like that, be silent and die. And I am putting some extra words in here. There's some segments that feel very fragmented, and I'm also going to assume that there's some things with the translation that's a bit rougher, but that's how I'm reading this section. There's also animosity towards. Okay, so we had animosity last time, right? Towards religious folk. This one shows some animosity towards people. Doesn't really seem directed at anyone in particular, just human. It says, "Wallow in your filth, misery, and stupidity." It's not just, I mean, this is the second time Misery's come up. It's the name of their band. This is kind of the thing, right? Um, but stupidity, as you speak your untamed homesickness, which could be alluded to once again, wanting to go towards the afterlife, right? Constantly speaking about wanting to get to heaven. And you can interpret this as a type of homesickness. You started there as an angel, then you were tossed here, to earth as human form, and when you die, you're going to go back. So you're homesick. You want to get back there, right? So you keep talking about dying to get back to heaven. Um, and he calls this miserable stupidity. and states, I think this does kind of lean back onto the whole anti-religious angle then, because there is a section here that says, "Your way will be forgotten, a species who worships death and not life." Really interesting way to put that. So yeah, that's that. Another song that I felt was rather warm and comforting, and I really liked how the choir came in and provided this extra level of comfort of being surrounded with more humans, more natural voices rather than the cold electricity of our guitar. And it's once again a song about hating people and, oh man, why do you guys give me albums like this? Just tell me in advance. I think this is going to be a new criteria, right? If you give me an album, do you want me to dig into the lyrics? Because the thing is I don't mind the music. It's not my cup of tea. I'm not going to put it on all the time, but I don't mind sections of it. And if Ellende came on again, maybe for a special selection or something, I'd have some anticipation digging into it, given how interesting it is and how it plays with the emotional landscape of the genre. But man, these lyrics are they're pushing me away as black metal is wont to do. So that's a bit of a shame. All right, we're going to dive into the next track here. This is the longest on the album, sitting at 15 minutes and 1 second. Kind of irritates me a little bit. Like everything else is fine, right? There's a 7 minute and 41 second, whatever. But like 15:01, just couldn't we have cut off a second of silence or something? Make it that nice, even 15. And 15's an odd number, so that's fun. Anyways, let's dive into this and see what they're gonna do next. Another song. This is our fourth song in a row that started out with acoustic. Even if you don't include the intro on our second track, even coming into it without the first, has an acoustic intro to it. So there's a little bit of reverb on this. And it was really cool to hear the scratching of the finger rubbing on the string, and it get that reverby echo too. Yeah, it sounds nice. So a nice little percussive element. I wish they could control it. That bend was so good. That was a really big statement to just push the guitar from center to the side. there we go again with the rather functional, slower drums. So far, this is a... Well, okay. Interesting bass idea there. So, black metal with toms is interesting. I wonder what caused them to make the bass so prominent in this one. Really nice syncopated ideas with all the drumming. Oh, you know, that's something I haven't really talked about much. There's those timing things in our second track. And right here we have a very loose, slow tempo again. Really interesting. Feels like it wants to fall apart, but the drummer's just using really interesting polyrhythmic ideas with a slight adjustment of timing to achieve that.
Alles geht, alles kommt zurück. Ewig rollt das Rad des Seins. Alles stirbt, alles blüht wieder auf. Ewig läuft das Jahr des Seins.
Yeah, delayed accents. Where are we taking this snare roll? All right. I got a lot of things to talk about. Did that not work? Oh, that song was long enough that my little shortcut button doodad over here that controls everything on the screen, it went to sleep. um, so this is really cool, but also really long in some of the, I don't want to say some of the worst ways, because I think it actually did this well. But it is a very lengthy slow burn. I think the slow burn portion of this took up at least 8 or 9 minutes of it. We heard the same foundational thing for a very long time. It has a purpose, though. We'll dig into that. I enjoy this on an artistic level. And I'd even say the payoff was kind of worth it. There's some really neat ideas going on there in the end. Um, but there's some things we got to touch on first before we hit any of that. This song had the most amount of screams in it. The wails, um, not the black metal harsh. I'm talking about the compressed, legit screams. And I just, I'm really trying to come around to them, at least on an artistic level. Like, so we've heard stuff similar to this. I think it was it Shining? We checked out some DSBM a few months ago, completely filled with this style of vocal delivery. And I couldn't help but laugh through most of the song because it's kind of absurd. Not that the sound is absurd, but the context of it. We kind of associate specific types of vocals with song, with music, and deviating outside of that presents a clashing of contexts. Um, and that context can always shift as well. Um, I mean, one thing that I always think of when it comes to this is um, the charismatic voice. If you know that channel, it's run by Elizabeth, I think is her name, and she's an operatic singer and vocal coach. I think she's a vocal coach. I might be wrong on that. She is an operatic singer though. I've heard her sing. She's just phenomenal voice. But she breaks down vocal performances, right? And she often laughs. Well, maybe not anymore. It's been a long time since I've seen her videos because I try not to spoil my own stuff. So I try to only watch songs I've heard. Kind of the unfortunate curse of the reactors. You can't watch other awesome reactors who are also informative, who I would love to learn from, because I'll spoil my own reactions. Um, but I've heard her laugh a couple of times with harsh vocals, especially specific types of growls, because by her ear it sounds like burping, and burping in a song is a funny context, right? um, but it's possible the more she listens to it, the less it sounds like burping, the more she gets acclimated to the sound itself, and that sort of dissonance of context will fade away. And so, that's what's happening to me here, is that this type of screaming, and I don't even call it screaming. I keep going back to wailing. It's a very specific type of vocal delivery that, at least to me, feels campy. It feels cheesy. Like, I think even if I heard this in a film of some, a slasher flick, a horror flick, where, somebody's running from a murderer and screaming like this, I think I would still kind of chuckle, get a little bit of a grin, because even then it feels like they're hamming it up a bit. Um, and it is one of those things, like, I understand the purpose behind it. The context is just really odd for me. I'm not laughing at the delivery itself, just my interpretation and biases that I bring into this specific sound and the sounds around it. And that may change as I further explore bands, vocalists who do this. It never comes off as sincere to me, and here it doesn't either. I believe the purpose is to put that emotion into sound, and that is the sound that the vocalist feels best portrays whatever emotion they're trying to send. I don't have any emotional resonance with it. It just sounds campy and hamming up to me. It sounds like a scream done by somebody who's trying to get laughs, right? Um, or somebody who doesn't understand how to properly act that type of fear, and this is their attempt at it. It is not a great portrayal of that type of fear that they're trying to showcase. It doesn't feel natural. And that's what it always feels like to me in these metal contexts, is it just doesn't feel natural. And I still have that relationship to the sound in this track. I much prefer the other more traditional black metal harsh that he uses than that wailing. And again, that's completely a bias thing. I don't want anyone to come out of this and say, "Oh, Bryan said that screaming style shouldn't be used," and I agree with him. So I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna take that little voice clip and use it to show all my friends I'm right. No, it's it's completely subjective. Biases come into it, all sorts of stuff. But this is like the third or fourth time I've heard it, and I'm still haven't come around to it yet. I still can't see it as the serious style that these vocalists probably see it as. It still feels tongue in cheek to me. So I'm trying not to, laugh or anything during. I think I've been pretty good about keeping the smirk under control, because I understand that, as an art form, this is what our vocalist wants to portray. And it's a serious delivery of their emotional state or whatever emotion they're trying to portray. It's just not connecting to me as a listener, which I'm going to put on me. Art, as always, should be made for the self and the consumer second. The self first, consumer second. And this seems like a very true portrayal as far as the artist's intent. And it's supposed to be understood seriously. So I'm trying to do that, even though I'm not a real big fan of that, and it always comes off a bit campy. The bass, where did the bass come from? The bass had some nice lines, had a nice round tone to it. It kind of, came out in the lower end and had some punch. Um, and there were some nice lines to it as well. It did follow along with the bass kick a lot, which sort of confirms my feelings that I thought I heard it along with the bass kick in the second track, I think it was, but I couldn't tell. Here it does it a lot. And so that was probably the bass that I heard in the second track. But it does stuff other than that, and it does some really nice. But they're not really melody ideas, but they're moving. They don't just sit on a pedal tone like we hear a majority of the rest of the time. And sorry, I'd like to hear more of that. I'm honestly hoping that this isn't a one off for track number 4, and that the bass presence will be more present throughout the other 3 tracks. I'm curious if my ear acclimated to it or if it does have more punch in the mix in this track. I find it odd that a mix would be different from track to track in that capacity. If you're adding new instruments, sure. If you're adding new instruments, sure. This track really didn't have a lot of the other instruments in it until the very end. The strings and Well, there's a really cool acoustic stringed instrument that was plucked. It might have been an acoustic guitar. Um, I honestly don't know what it was. The timbre was not recognizable to me, but there's a lot of different timbres for acoustic guitars between strings and body and the acoustic whole, which I think is what it's actually called too. It doesn't have a fancy name, last I looked up. Um, and like all the materials can have effects on the coloring of the sound, so it could very easily just be a type, even a lute, right? Which is basically a guitar, but there's all sorts of different things. So, but yeah, we had that in there, which was really neat. I can't remember if the choir was in here or not. We had brass show up at the end or something brass like. It could have just been, a synth tone with sort of that brassy buzz to it. Um, but all this stuff came in at the end. It was the big payoff to the slow burn, and that left a lot of room throughout the rest of the track. And maybe that's why the bass got a little bit of a boost. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see in our final, you know, 20 minutes of this album what the bass does, what our person does with the bass and its presence primarily, its ability to be heard. Now the last two here kind of go hand in hand, and since I already kind of touched, I was going to talk about the sparsity of the track up until the end, but I kind of just touched on that with the bass work, and I think I know where the bass came out now. So repetition and slow burn. This is a very long slow burn. Like I said, our core foundational element of the slow burn was set up early in the track, probably about 30 or 40% into it. So we're talking a good 8 minutes worth of slow burn, 9 minutes worth of slow burn. Highly repetitive. We do hear some variations on it. We get a couple of lines, varying lines. The vocals come in with a couple different vocal techniques and vocal lines themselves. There was what sounded like a soundbite throughout some of it. Um, and then we ended it with the strings and the brass coming in. Like there were things to keep it fresh, and that's why I said it wasn't really too negative for me. It did keep things moving, but interestingly, we never built on it. Not like a slow burn where you add layers and layers and layers until you have like this 12 layer thing at the end. This is more about having a foundation and changing what's on top, only ever putting one or two layers on top of it. We do change that up a little bit at the end, but for the most part, it's about changing up just a couple of ideas on top of our foundation. And this introduces heavy repetition to the track. But it also creates something that repetition does very well, which is cycles, cyclical elements. Um, and we're going to slowly, moderately, we're going to transition this into the lyrics a little bit, because in order to understand why this was done when none of the other songs have worked with this, which I talked about, this is a huge departure when our first three songs were linear or linear adjacent to the point that I couldn't find a structure. And then we hit a song that is 9 minutes of like, I don't know, an 8 bar phrase. You're like, so what happened here? Why'd you guys change things up? I firmly believe the answer is in our lyrics. You see, the lyrics are about something. Uh, no, I don't quite understand everything that's going on here, but there does seem to be an understanding, and again, this kind of calls back to the whole anti-religious component. There's a repeated phrase in here. It says, "What help is a plea that poisons our world?" A river bucks before you like a dead vein and leaves behind drought and decay. The grass turns to mourning, sweet green will die lonely. There's a lot of elements in here that talk about something that is positive and gets twisted. And there is one specific line in here that I think is the key to it all. And it says, the fruit rots as if they never wanted to live. And to me, this goes along with the whole, you're just living until you die so you can have your beautiful eternity, right? Death is still the target. And of course, I think I need to make this clear. Um, it really is about perspective, right? If you are atheist, you believe that this is all the existence we get, and before and after is nothing. We become the dust in the stars, dust in space. Then death is not something to praise. It's not necessarily something to fear. It is just a part of the human condition, but it's not necessarily something to work towards. But in a religious aspect, it is something. You're not looking to die, you're looking to be reborn in the next phase, right? And this is true for any sort of um, religious component or religion with an afterlife component to it. It's not a death cult so much as it is a rebirth cult, to use their terminology, from the other perspective. It really depends on how you're viewing things. Um, and that's going to inform the vocabulary, which informs the tone, right? A death cult sounds very different than working towards your afterlife, and being preoccupied by death, right? So I just wanted to point that out because a lot of this is from a very negative view of religion, and I try to be a bit neutral on the channel, right? So I just want to point that clarification out there. Now, this does, going back to the idea, the fruit rots as if it never wanted to live, is another way to interpret somebody who's working towards their afterlife, right? This world can be destroyed as long as I did good enough in what I needed to do to reach the afterlife. And as we saw in previous tracks, that he believes that the rules of religion tend to create misery. And I kind of attributed it to the self, right? Living a life bound by the rules of an ancient text without, any adaptation for modern times is going to create a miserable experience for a person. But it could also be read that it creates misery for those around them as well, which I think is an argument that Ellende is presenting. Um, whether it's something as just being a miserable person to be around, especially if there is no tolerance for those who don't believe your religion, or it's people with religious views attempting to dictate the lives of those who don't have religious views and making things miserable on an even larger scale, as we can see whenever church and states have connections. We can even look at something as, extremely on the nose as the Dark Ages, when the Catholic Church ruled and things just were not great for anyone except the Catholic Church. So we take this idea that the fruit doesn't even want to live and it rots itself, and by rotting itself, it taints all the nature around it as well, and it invites the negative aspects, right? It's going to invite death and decay and maggots and all this. And so the grass around it will slowly turn and die. And the river will eventually leave behind nothing but drought and decay. And the repeated phrase is, what good is a plea that poisons our world? What good is something that might help you later, but is destructive right now? Is that actually something worth exploring? Interestingly, and this is where everything starts to cycle back in on the composition technique. For those of you who thought I forgot, I didn't. Nothing's really tied into that yet, but here we go. There is a quote in here from a book, novel. What is this? It's a work of philosophical fiction by Nietzsche called "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." Zarathustra. Thus spoke Zarathustra. And there's a quote, I think, from that book. It says, "I don't love people. People are too imperfect for me. Love for people would kill me." It boils down to the absurd assessment that the character of existence should make the philosopher happy. If it were possible, this old saint has in his forest not yet heard that God is dead. So we speak right here at the beginning of a very misanthropic point of view, which sort of ties into everything else that we've been talking about. We talk about the imperfection of humanity, and a lot of this album so far has been about humanity's destruction of what's around them because of a promised afterlife that we don't have proof of. You'll destroy what you know exists in an attempt to get a better later existence that might not exist, right? And this frustration has turned into a sort of hatred that is coming through as a seething, uh, passionate disagreement with this other worldview. And it is emphasized right here. I don't love people. They're too imperfect, and if I tried to love them, it would kill me. That has been directly quoted for this track. This is the soundbite, I think. Now, where all this ties into the music, it says, everything goes, everything comes back. The wheel of being rolls on forever. Everything dies, everything blooms again. The year of being runs forever. To say that life is cyclical, there is no I'm living now and then I will have my infinity in the afterlife, right? It is that you will die and you will allow the birth of something new, and it will die and it will allow the birth for something new. And this has happened for millions of years, and it will continue to happen for a million years. Even if the world were to explode or burn up from the sun, something would grow out of its absence. It might take a while because it might set off a very big chain of events, but eventually something will grow out of the decay. And this idea of cycles, of infinite cycles, I believe is the purpose of the slow burn. I think it's a big stretch, but I don't think it is a coincidence that the first time we enter into a repetitive structure is in a song that directly brings up infinite cycles. It brings it up as a quote from a book. Yeah. Again, I do think it's a stretch to make a 9-minute repetitive cycle off of a 10-second soundbite, but it does line up. I'm gonna roll with it. So let's speaking of rolling, let's keep going. You know, the rest of that song, it was hello? That was weird. Um let's do that so that doesn't happen again. We are on this track here. Um the rest of the track followed through with a lot of the typical ideas. Oh, we didn't talk about the brass. I mean, there wasn't really anything to talk about. It does what the strings do and what everything else does. There's a lot of really cool instrumentation in that track, but compositionally, it all kind of leans on the same thing of adding an air of textural beauty on top of the harmonic beauty that the guitars are doing with their colder uh, tones and timbre. But yeah, I mean, the rest of the track does everything you'd expect. There's dissonance between the lyrics and the music. There's beauty in a lot of the harmonic ideas and the wider orchestration, their timbres. And there's a lot of warmth that comes from everything outside of the band that works very well. Not really clashing with. It does kind of clash, doesn't it? I mean, it works well together, but there is that contrast there. There's a lot of opposing ideas in here. There's just a ton of them, aren't there? So much of this album has been about taking a concept that black metal does well, finding the opposite, and running with it not as a replacement, but adjacent to the black metal technique. Interesting. 2 hours into this. All right, we got 3 more tracks. Let's hit it. And oh, I need this on. We would have hit it, and I would have known what was going on. All right, now let's go. 5 for 5 on acoustic openings. This kind of has a dreamy vibe to it. Very different emotion from the other tracks and their openings. I love them ghost notes on the snare. This is beautiful. The drummer is really opening up. The bass is out now too. You know, I don't mind the guitar taking the melody here, but I wish it was just a hair bit quieter. Not a lot, just a little bit. even know if you can call it the bass's work counterpoint because our lead guitar is just arpeggiating. But man, that bass work is so good against the guitar line. You know, I saw I saw that we were coming up on time, and I honestly thought we were gonna move into the next section, the next track, just smoothly move into it because our last instrumental also did that. Granted, it was the intro to the album, but I figured that's what was gonna happen. And I looked down, I was like, oh, it's 7 minutes. I said this was kind of a one idea thing. I can kind of keep this in the back of my mind, hopefully. We'll just talk about both together, but then it just ends. um, uh, that's an abrupt ending. Now, here's something I really enjoy about this. First of all, it's just gorgeous. We have this beautiful arpeggiating idea and bass line that runs counter to it that is there the whole time. We base the entire 5 minute song on this core foundational idea. We have this idea of repetition and slow burn. Well, it's not a slow burn; it's just a repetition. Oh no, we do get to like 7, 8, 9 layers there at the end. So yeah, it's a slow burn. Um, and it comes right off of our last track. I wonder if there's this idea that um, they really enjoyed this idea of tying repetition to that soundbite. They weren't quite done exploring the concept yet. I'm going to wager that track 6 and 7 will return to the general sound that we had on tracks 2 and 3, that linearity and structure. It'll be interesting if we don't, but that's my guess. So yeah, okay, so we got to talk about two things here. Primarily because they're just phenomenal. The bass, right? So we have this constant do 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 do, just constant arpeggiation on the guitar, whether it's clean or distorted. That is what the guitar does for 5 minutes. We do get some embellishing ideas on top of it with the second guitar line, but our primary guitar that's present through this entire track does just that. The bass has a really nice bass line. It is like a 4-bar phrase, so we do have a riff that repeats over and over with it. It's not like it changes constantly, but it is very cool. It provides a beautiful low end tone, and it has a rhythmic structure, a rhythmic pattern that is different than our lead guitar, which is primarily it's just one rigid rhythm, right? Constant eighth notes. The bass has some really nice movement to it. Changes to its rhythmic structure. Sometimes it holds notes, sometimes it plays faster, sometimes it follows like pretty predictable rises and falls in pitch, and sometimes it just kind of makes these wild jumps around pitch wise. It's just a really nice bass line, and it's definitely something I would like to learn and just play over and over. It's a really soothing bass line. I love it. And see, that's a weird thing, right? This is not a soothing album lyrically. And there's a lot of aspects to it when we hit more traditional black metal elements that I would not call soothing either. But there are plenty of moments where I would say that on the majority, this is a soothing black metal album. And that is such a weird thing to say. And again, I'm sure there are some longtime black metal fans like, yeah, I always listen to black metal to go to sleep. It is very soothing for me. And like, excellent. I'm not there yet. The black metal parts are not soothing to me, but this is a Blackened soothing album. There are plenty of non-black metal but still Blackened elements that I find very soothing on this album. Unfortunately, the Blackened elements on this track did not pan out for me. That distorted guitar tone, too much. Too much volume, too much I don't know, treble EQ. It cut through and was piercing in a way that probably works with busier tracks when we have more electric guitar, or sorry, more distorted guitars, or when we have the growls in and the vocals need to cut through some of the guitar needs to cut through some of the noise. But here it doesn't, and it is piercing, and I just a bit much for me. Um, and then there's the drums. Yes, the drummer keeps surprising me. I feel like the longer the album goes on, the more intricate their drumming gets. And I know it's all the same person, right? We've talked about this before. It's a one person project, but the drumming continues to evolve in a way that feels like shackles being removed every track, and or maybe weights, right? You got like arm weights and ankle weights, and every track they come off more, and the drummer can, I don't know, do more intricate ideas. And it's just so neat to hear an instrument basically open up across the course of an album. And this is one of those things where this concept would have been completely lost on me if we had just done, a single song reaction. And that's not to say that that's what the author intended. The I don't know why I feel it that way. Maybe other people don't. Maybe they feel the drumming's rather consistent. I don't. I feel like the further we go on, the more melodic the drums get. And I really enjoy that. And this was just another fantastic display of that melodic drumming. We got those beautiful ghost notes on the snare in here. Some phenomenal tom runs. The cymbal work was great. By the end of it, we kind of chilled out as the drum had less spotlight, as we had more and more layers come in. We had the strings and stuff, and the second guitar, and eventually we had so many layers. The drums kind of said, okay, I'll kind of back off to that metronome style so you guys can have some space. But in the earlier parts of the song, the drums really shone on a melodic level, and it's so gorgeous. The last thing I want to talk about before we move on is that was a weird accent. Um, is that I really loved this. Ellende's music minus the lyrics, I could listen to a lot of. Now, granted, like I said earlier, there's still some of the black metal sections that I'm just not as keen on. Right? You can keep those blast beats and 16th note picking away from me for a bit. But everything else on this album, I mean, the opening idea on track 2 is still a highlight for me. Maybe just because I wasn't expecting it, but that is just a beautiful. I was so glad to return to it by the end of the track too. Such a great section. This was just a beautiful track from start to finish. This black and chill music, yeah, I could do this. Is there more of this? I don't know if it's necessarily something I need like 15 albums of. Maybe just one or two is good for when I'm in the mood for it. But yeah, I'm digging this. All right, let's move on. Honestly, just was not expecting anything like this. When I saw this was black metal, I kind of expected the worst. And there's abrasive elements here, right? I've talked about them. Not everything in here is my cup of tea, but I mean, that last track just showcases everything that I love about their composition style. All right, let's hit it. See what's going on now. Track 6. 6 for 6 on acoustic openings. Maybe we can't count that one. The drumming is kind of punky, and because of the fuzziness, it's giving me a shoegaze vibe. Okay. Those vocals on this style, so I mean, I expected them, but it's also odd. Whoa. Yeah, they basically completely dodge any accents in that third bar. Here we go. Yeah, there's just like no accents in there at all. That is wild. Even that one cymbal hit that has a bit of punctuation to it is on the offbeat of 3. What? Oh, that's a fun little halftime idea. Yeah, see, drums popping off, man. sounds very close to what the guitars were playing, but this has a bit more embellishment to it. It's a fancied up variation on the guitar line, which I wish the guitar would have done rather than just playing straight chords up to this point. I'll excuse it though, because it sounds like we're getting in for a real good part. Really nice having those 16th notes on the snare and then the triplets on the cymbals, giving us that nice polyrhythm. What is that? There's something over on the right. Oh, I need to pause that. It was like a ba ba ba, like an alarm going off. I don't know how long that had been happening, but I only picked it up for the last 30 seconds or so, and it's just like, man, that was starting to grate on me. Interesting choice. Um, that whole song was kind of bonkers. I feel like we continued on the idea of repetition, right? We had an ABA pattern where our A never really shifted to any variation or subsection, and our B was a variation of our A. And that was when I pointed out that the strings were playing the same chord progression as our A, but they had a little bit more flourish to them. This is a song that felt very long to me. Oddly enough, longer than track 4, which had a massive slow burn in it and was 15 minutes long. It's twice as long as this one, almost exactly. And this one felt so much longer. I don't know if that's the album kind of wearing me down a little bit. Or also the fact that it felt kind of like uh, like a post-rock kind of drumming, very punky. Well, it was punky of some sort, right? Not post-rock, punk. And kind of got like a shoegazy feel from the guitars with that punk sound. And I think the simplicity of that tied into the repetition is what made it feel so long. Um, but it was wild. Like we ditched the pattern we have going so far, where we have uh, acoustic intros. We did have a that it was a piano at the end. It was the same repeated tone we had at the beginning. Okay, interesting choice. Um, but we had four of those, and then we get straight into the song. And the song starts off with a punk drum pattern and just basic black metal stuff, you know? You tremolo pick, maybe it was 16th note picking. I think it was pretty even. Um, with two guitars doing two different patterns, but changing notes at the same time. So we get these really nice dyads with shifting distances between them to craft an emotional journey through the dyads with tons of fuzz and bright tones overall. Very shoegazy. Very interesting to go that route. But what I found was more interesting, because after like the 2 minute mark of still doing this, I was kind of over the whole guitar shoegaze thing. The drums start to do some wild stuff, and I pointed the one out where we completely ditch all accents in bar three, and it's just like, what is going on there? It's a wild, and it wasn't a one off. Like, this was the pattern, right? We accent every downbeat. I think we have a snare on 2 and 4 actually, but 1 and 3 still have a bass kick on there. It's not super accented, but it's still there. So we're just laying down the downbeat on everything, and just out of nowhere, just like sound. And then a rogue cymbal hit, which is accenting just because there's no other cymbal sound. It's a bright tone against a bunch of lower end stuff, so it's contrasted. I'm like, where's that? It's the end of 3. Like, what are you doing with that? And then we just get right back into it like nothing happened. But we do this over and over and over. It's wild. Um, we get some nice drum fills. Like every 2 or 4 repetitions, we get a different fill at the end to bring us back to the beginning. Um, just again, really enjoying the drum work here. It's wild to hear so many different styles presented throughout this album. We trade off the band for a string rendition of the same ideas with a bit more nuance to them, and I enjoyed this section. It didn't last very long though, and we got right back to that same foundational idea, and we added some more stuff to it this time, and we did get a new guitar line, and I think a violin came back later to embellish on top of it, but it was just a lot of repetition. I'm missing the days of the mostly linear concepts we saw in tracks 2 and 3. And we only have 6 more minutes left on this album. I am going to wrap this up about 2:45, 3 hours. Like I said, I'm getting pretty good at predicting how long it takes me to get through stuff. Unless it's a live stream. And then I'll aim for 2 hours and end at 3. Because I don't know how to shut up during a live stream. We have a lot of fun on those, though. Um, where was I going with this? Oh, yeah, everything else in the song was um, pretty typical for it. I don't think there's anything new I want to talk about. It's it's the parts of the album I've been less enthused about taking the spotlight all at one time. It's just a condensed form of everything that hasn't quite hit me as well without any of the context that helped me understand them or helped me appreciate them better. This is just, yeah. I will say though, we didn't get any of the shrieks this time, so that's a positive. Now, as you know, shoegaze kind of has this bright. I already used the term bright for the guitar tones. Um, we continue on with this idea of more positive guitar sounds here. As far as our dyads go and the emotional resonance, there's nothing in here that's rather aggressive or angsty, and yet the lyrics are. So we're just going to continue the trend here. This starts off in one of the most antagonistic ways yet. Very first line: "What are you looking for, you stupid child? Let me be your guide." So I think we're still on the religious train, and says, you keep asking for answers about the universe, and you think that your prize is on the other side of death. So let me help you out here. Goes on to give some advice. There's only one way out. Pull that noose around your neck, goading this other person into suicide under the presumption that they're helping them. They themselves don't feel like they're helping, right? They believe there's nothing on the other side of death, so they know they're just killing someone or assisting in. It really is a way to goad out an argument. It says, "You're depraved, you're deluded, so just do it." But then we extrapolate and we really lean into some of the ideas that we saw in track 4. Was that the long one? Yep, in the soundbite that lend itself into a bit of misanthropy. Says you need to understand the logic that man must be destroyed. Well, should be destroyed. Like a virus, a beautiful world has been pricked by pain. So humanity has caused a ton of pain on this beautiful planet. And then we go through a lot of words. Freedom, freedom, let me breathe. Freedom, please, leave me alone. In the end, you die alone. Misery, misery, misery screams. Accompany a dead army full of suffering. Oh, also, one more thing on his thing about humans being a virus. Says they're pigs, a life fueled by hate, a species drowned in hate. Which, yeah, that's one of the few things I think I can get behind on this thing. I'm not a religious person, but I try my best not to look down on or bash religions because people need comfort. And as long as they're not imposing anything on other people through their religion, it's a personal practice for them that brings them comfort and understanding. I'm fine with that. But religion has brought a bunch of hate into this world, and even without religion, humanity has brought a lot of hate into this world. So this is one of the few things I think I can get behind, but where he takes this understanding, I can't. Humanity does have a lot of hate, but you have to be blind not to see the love as well. Or blinded, I should say. There are certainly people who would put blinders on you to keep you from seeing the positives, right? But I think that's going to be one of my big issues with listening to this album again. As much as I enjoy a lot of the musical phrases in it, and fortunately, the lyrics are in a language I can't understand, and they're spoken in a way that I wouldn't be able to pick up even if they were in English. But at the end of the day, I won't be able to understand the lyrics in the moment, but I will probably still remember the core themes. And the way that they're sung also sort of implies a lot of that negativity and anguish and pain. I just can't get behind these lyrics. They're it's ironic almost that the understanding from our narrator, the perspective is that the world is filled with hate and misery. So I want to hatefully sing about how I hate things. Like, bro, you're not helping, right? It's certainly one way to point out issues. It's got to be done constructively, though. I'm not going to necessarily say that you can't be aggressive in your approach to correct issues. I do think that certain forces are required for certain situations. It's not necessarily a one size fits all thing, but if you're just going to point out things, it's got to be done from a different perspective, or at least not be hypocritical about it. I hate that the world is filled with hate, so let me speak about hate. Like, no. I just, and like, here's the other thing too, is that this is just a black metal thing, right? Me and black metal lyrics have had such a tough time over the years. It could be entirely that the lyrics have been pumped up a bit to better fit the black metal genre, or possibly to accommodate more extreme sounds that people expect with black metal, you know. It doesn't necessarily need to be that the vocalist or the lyricist feels this way in particular. There is an underlying argument here that I think is valid. It's the presentation and the way that this underlying idea gets extrapolated into other concepts, including an execution of ways to fix it, that I disagree with. But I don't know if that's the actual ideas of our vocalist, or if that's, you know, dressing it up and amplifying it a bit for the genre, for a supposed audience for it that's going to want something more extreme. But black metal does seem to constantly bring in lyrics that I just don't like. I have trouble getting behind, and this is one of them. This whole album, actually, not just it. This track is certainly the most aggressive, saying, "If you're so ready for the afterlife, I'll help you get there." But yeah, the whole album's kind of bounced off of me in that way. Let's wrap this up. Hit our last track here. It's only 5 minutes long. Might even be the shortest. No, it's not the shortest on the album. That would be our two. So it's the shortest one with lyrics. The two tracks that are shorter are both instrumentals. All right, so let's finish this album up and see what's going on. Well, 6 out of 7 had acoustic intros. Alright, the next edition. I wasn't expecting a pause, but I was expecting drums or bass to come in. We got a piano instead, though, and the drums. Actually, the guitar got replaced by the piano. That piano is resonating hard. I thought I heard another instrument in the bass range over on the right, but it was just the low end of the piano reverberating over to the other side of the headphones. So another variation, we got our solo guitar. We're gonna add the... Nope. Well, we'd have to do 2 repetitions. So now we would add... Yep. But now we have the drums. Okay, I see how this... Ooh. See, I love this dude's composition. I do. Oh, beautiful little bass element right there. Oh, I really figured we were gonna have an arpeggiated chord, the one that was alluding towards there, and we didn't get that strong resolution. It was semi-resolved. It's not like it was left hanging, but so I think I want to take an example just to look at take a moment to look at an example of this type of structure that we've seen all throughout this album. This ABA, but where A, the second A is a variation of our first one. I don't think this is true for track number two. And as we saw, well, yeah, as we saw in four and five, we kind of sat within a single idea. Well, yeah, not applicable to four. I can't remember if it was for five as well. I think five was one single idea as well. But two, three, six, and seven all had this ABA concept that I think was really fascinating. Um, where we present an idea and we do a couple changes with it. So we started with our single guitar, then we went for the guitar duet, then we did drum and bass. Sorry, drum drum and piano. Then we did drum and guitar, drum and both guitar, and then we introduced our B section, which was our blast beat black metal idea. Then we bring back the A though, and we re-explore our original idea, even again with new context. We have the bass, the drums, the acoustic guitars, we have electric guitars this time around, we have the piano in here still, and we explore this in different combinations yet again. And this is something we saw in tracks 5 and 2 and 3, this ABA, where our second A is an exploration of, it's a recontextualization of what we explored in our first A. And it's just really neat for them to lay it out very clearly here with acoustic instruments, um, for me to showcase that, especially in a very structured way, which isn't always necessarily something we saw in other tracks. It was kind of less structured in that we did see variation on an idea, but it wasn't something like every two repetitions we're going to do something in this pattern, right? And that's why it was really easy for me to break down here. Whereas in other tracks, it might have been like, oh, we've done this for 8 bars. Let's add this other line. Oh, we've done this eight bars. Let's add another. We've done it for 12 bars now. Let's add another line. Oh, that's too many. Let's pull one out. That kind of thing. This was very straightforward, very simplified idea of this concept that um, allows me to showcase it in pretty clear example. And I love that. Right? This is something I talk about all the time. Work smarter, not harder. Take something you've done and recontextualize it. Put it in a new setting. Change one thing in it. Use something you've already written in a new way. And it has happened so often in here. And it was kind of at the periphery. Like now that I've thought about it this way, I'm like, oh, that actually happened here and there and also there. And it like recontextualizes a lot of the sections in here where I noticed it but uh, didn't know it. It's always kind of sat there on the periphery, something that's been stuck at the back of my mind. That was kind of familiar, but I don't know why. And I think that's it. Is it's been utilized so much in this album like that, and it's just really great writing. And of course, when we aren't doing the black metal stuff, track 5 our instrumental, track 1 our instrumental, all of our instrumental intros. Um, and then right there, our A section for track 7. So many great moments of beautiful composition. And it's not even like that beauty is removed from the metal sections. It's still there. It's just buried under a bunch of stuff that sometimes removes the beauty and sometimes tries to lean into it in a more aggressive manner. And aggressive beauty, I think, is the best description of this album. Um, But I will reiterate, I would love an album that doesn't have the black metal baggage. And I don't know if it is black metal baggage. Like I don't know where this person's education came from. Maybe they started in black metal and moved towards other things, which is where the black metal baggage idea works as a concept, but maybe they started in more classical means and began to incorporate black metal into it, which, in case that wouldn't be baggage, black metal baggage. But I still really love almost every section that isn't blackened. And I think it speaks to their composition that it works in both styles, that it is a solid black metal album, but it's also just a really solid classical adjacent. Well, it's not really a classical adjacent album, but it has really solid classical adjacent components to it. And the composition itself is solid from start to finish. I'm just not a big fan of the timbres utilized throughout. Um, the lyrics on this one, they're relatively short. There's 3 stanzas, 8 lines in total, 7 lines in total. Like the ruler of time, will you admit your pain? In the arms of finitude. I don't know what finitude is. I don't know if that got mistranslated. You have to admit you are alone. Your burden in the earth realm will be forgotten. So this feels like a really rough translation. A lot of this has kind of been in this same area if I had read things very directly rather than injecting my own words to kind of make them flow better. But it almost feels like it's saying that eventually you're going to have to admit that you've kind of made things worse here and that you ended up alone at the end of your life without anything to look forward to. But since, existing here in this plane was such a burden to you, it'll be over soon and you will be forgotten. Which is just terrible things to say to somebody when I assume this is sort of on their deathbed. Um, and just such a negative perspective. Like, once again, I just can't get behind the lyrics. Um, and it just leans into this tonal dissonance, right? If the song is aggressive and bleak and you have bleak lyrics, okay, I can say, we have some synergy there. I'm not a big fan of it, but I appreciate it. But just the tonal dissonance here, I don't understand the purpose of it. And if somebody wants to inform me whether there's a interview gives me an insight into the authorial intent, or if you have your own perspective on it, let me know. Like, you know, I've been informed. This one I bring up a lot because it stuck with me. It's a really interesting concept that I've heard before and just never really noticed is dancing through the pain. Sad songs with happy beats or happy music to them, and it's a really big phenomenon in some cultures that shows up a lot in their music. Um, and like I get that. I just needed someone to put it into words and present it to me. But this one, maybe I need that, but on the surface, I don't get why the music is so comforting and rich and warm, inviting, and then the lyrics are exclusionary. They're full of hatred. It's us versus them. It's I will help you die if that's what you want. There's no bridge to be made. There's no meeting halfway. There's no trying to understand it from another perspective. It is just hatred and isolation and blaming others for the state of the world when this person's not helping to change that. They're just contributing the same. It ends up feeling hypocritical on the lyrical level. And when you pair that with the beauty in the lyrics, it's almost as if they're saying that if you come to our side, you'll find real beauty. And oh man, that is just a big leap to make given just how disgusting some of these lyrics are. I'm just, it really hinders my ability to enjoy anything on the lyrical side. The dissonance, if the dissonance brings out something positive, someone hits me up in the comments, they're like, this is what I get out of the dissonance. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of see that. There's still so much negative baggage that comes with this, though, that I want to come around to see another side, just to appreciate this on another level, but it's got a lot of cons to outweigh. That's that's all I'm gonna say. There's a lot of negativity that is crafted from this asynchronicity between the lyrical themes and musical ones, that any sort of positive is gonna have a lot of work to do. Um, and I guess that's about it. That's my read on this album. It's depressive. It's not, it's bleak, it's antagonistic, it's aggressive, but for some reason they decide to pair it with some of the most beautiful things I've heard, and I just can't reconcile with that. It kind of sucks that I enjoy so much of this. I would not mind listening to more of the instrumental stuff, but man, the lyrics really pull this album down for me. Those are my thoughts on Ellende's Todbringer. Let me know what you thought of this one. Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said? Correct me on? Answer any of the questions I had? Let me know down in the comments section. Above that, if you could, head into the description box, and there you'll find a link for Linktree. Takes you to this menu right here. It has links for everything related to the channel. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server. You can find my music in there and so much more. Go ahead and check that out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow. I doubt many people watch this live. Now that I think about it, like usually, like I'll be back tomorrow and we're going to do this. And I think that makes sense for a 20-minute video. But a 2-hour video that drops late Eastern Standard Time, 3-hour video. Do we hit 3 hours? Just barely. That drops late Eastern Standard Time, drops past midnight for a lot of European viewers. I don't think most people are watching it. Where tomorrow we'll do this is going to be accurate. But still, tomorrow we'll have our live stream. I'll try to get that out at 5 for everyone else. Usual 5 p.m. EST upload time. And then Monday we're going to start Positive Confusion, which I think is going to be fun. It's those songs that you're like, what did I listen to? Can I have another though? I don't know what it was, but I'd like more, please. And that's always going to be a blast to listen to. So, all right, until next time, remember to be critical and not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.